appreciate that. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure because I had missed. I heard you when you had referenced it, but I didn't get to hear if you had explained it or not. But I just wanted to make sure you got to explain. But go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I think it's all part of the process. I think Yeshua is just doing something that has always been done in the temple. Um, as part of the Pesach, there is a sheaf which the Kohen Gadol and the Levim, they have to present as part of the first offered. So as part of the first batch, the first batch, first fruits that is offered in Pesach festival. Normally, Pesach normally coincides with the wheats and the barley ripening. That's why it's called the month of the Aviv, because it's a agricultural term that coincides with the ripening of barley crops. So within the festival of Pesach, the high priest has to present the first of that year, and he has to count. And then it depends on, this is where the people get into confusion, because at some point within Pesach, right, there's going to be a Shabbat, and that High Shabbat will begin the count. So at some point within the festival, the first part is presented, and that is what Yeshua is referring to when he's presented before the Father. So this is, I guess, a symbology, or some kind of symbolic reference, or the fuller picture, shall I say. Yeshua is part of the first batch that is offered. That is why he's part of the first fruits. He's presented to God, and hence why when he has presented, well, when he's about to present himself, or within the process of presenting himself, he tells Miriam not to come and touch him, because the first has to be offered, hasn't. And then once that is offered, mostly in the temple, then the other people, let me say, everyone else can then eat of the barley crop of that year. So that's essentially what it is. And then the fuller aspect of it is then Shavuot. But this is not Shavuot. This is Yom HaBikurim. This is just the presentation of the first crop. So that's essentially what Yeshua is doing. When he then presents himself, and then that's when he then can now interact with the other people. And that's why you see, is it Thomas and the rest of and everyone else like clinging on to him. But essentially, all it is that Yeshua has to present himself before the Father as part of the first, being redeemed, of part of the first batch of that year. And you can then say, for believers, he is the first batch of those who will be resurrected. So all this kind of ties in, both in the temple worship, as well as the fuller context of what Yeshua was talking about in terms of resurrection, being the first that is resurrected. So that's essentially what it is.
That was you responding to Void Prospect?
Well, Void
I mean,
and
I said Void
Talmud.
Prospect. I mean, uh, Void Aspect. My bad.
Yeah, you can see that, the mention of this in Vaikra. So that's Leviticus 23 from, I think, what is it? Leviticus 23, I think from verse 10. Verse 10, it goes into that. So, but yes, that's essentially the procedure for the for the Oma.
So the question is that gender specific? I'm trying to understand what you mean by that. Is that gender specific?
And gender, no, it just relates to the presentation of crops, of new crops. That's all it is.
Yeah, I'm
It's not
asking that because the woman was not allowed to touch, but the men were. So I'm asking, based on the premise that you posited, is
mhm.
that contingent on a gender, handling
No,
that touch?
I
Because
wouldn't
shortly after he declined her advances to cling to him, he allowed somebody else to do it, and it's that same day it happened. It wasn't like later on or anything like that.
Yeah, one thing the Brit Hadashah doesn't take into account in that whole narrative is the time. So the time in which someone else touches him, it doesn't. I don't think the New Testament talks of the time in between then. So it could have been hours, it could have been days. It depends. But all I know is that Yeshua had to present himself as part of the following following the symbology of what is done in the temple, and also
Can you
and also
read? Can
noting
you read? Can
and also noting um, in terms of it depends how you look at it. Touching a dead body, it's another law within itself. So
yes? Can you read verse 19 of John 20? We're gonna actually the text does give you time, right? So if you can read verse 19 of that, we'll make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, I can read it if y'all need me to.
yeah,
All
John
right, go
9.
ahead, tell me if you don't mind reading.
Hey, and when y'all flesh that out, man, Divine, I got some questions I gotta ask you.
Sure.
So John 19 from when? From where?
Mhm. Yeah, just read verse 19. This is right after that incident with Mary Magdalene. Verse 19 tells you what portion of the day it was when he transitioned to go see the rest of the disciples. Can you read verse 19?
John 19:19.
No, John 20:19.
John 20:19.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So it says, then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for the fear of the Jews, it says, came Yeshua and stood in the midst and
Okay.
said, "Peace be unto you."
There you go. You can stop right there. So the evening of that day, the same day that he interacted with Mary Magdalene, the evening of that same day, he went and appeared to his disciples. So it wasn't the next day. It was the evening of that same day. So typically, when they would congregate like that, it would be during the twilight hours, before it becomes pitch black into the evening, right? So that's, I mean, the same day is when he appeared to them. So that's why I was just trying to understand what you had mentioned in regards to um, if it's gender specific, because he was touched by Thomas that same day in the evening, but wouldn't allow Mary to touch him earlier in that same day. So that's why I was asking you, is it gender specific because it's the same day that both incidents happened? Just for clarity's sake.
Yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with gender. If anything, it's just a matter of the time in which Yeshua presented himself to the Father, and then he's now back on earth, and people can interact with him. So whether Thomas had come prior to Mary Magdalene or whoever, the message will still be the same.
Okay, so you say he ascended that same day after interacting with Mary and then descended and went and appeared to the disciples. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay. I was just asking because that was a unique perspective because I didn't see the descending part anywhere in the text. So I was just kind of fascinated by the premise you proposed because it's pretty unique. But I agree with some of it, but the fact that the same day he was touched by somebody, it just makes me kind of reconsider it, right? Well, so like what I would do to associate it in conjunction with what you shared would be Leviticus chapter 21, and several things. Leviticus chapter 21. Tell me, can you get Leviticus chapter 21, read verses 1 to 4, and then 7 to 9?
Con. This is Leviticus 21, verse 1 through 4. And it says, And Yahuwah said to Moshe, Speak unto the priests of the sons of Aaron, and say unto them, There shall be none defiled for the dead amongst his people, but for his kin that is near unto him, that is his mother, or his father, or his son, or his daughter, or for his brother, and for his sister a virgin, that is nigh unto him, which has had no man. For her he may be defiled. But he cannot defile himself, being a chief man amongst his people, to profane himself. And
Okay, verse 7.
verse 7 through 9, you say, You said to drop down to verse 7 through 9.
Yeah, 7 to 9, and then you're gonna pick up 11 to 12.
Okay. And it says, and they shall not take a woman that is a whore or profane, neither shall they take a woman to put away from her that is put away from her man, for he is holy unto his Elohim. And you shall sanctify him there, for he offers the bread of your Elohim, and he shall be holy unto you. For I, Yahuwah, which sanctify you, am holy. And the daughter of any priest, if she profane herself by playing the whore, she profanes her father, and she shall be burnt with fire. In verse 11
Okay,
and
read verse
12.
11 to 12.
And it says, neither shall he go into any dead body to defile himself for his father or his mother, neither shall he go out of the sanctuary, nor profane the sanctuary of his Elohim. For the crown of the anointing oil is of his Elohim is upon him, for I am Yahuwah.
All right, so three things to consider there. The first thing is the dead body situation, right? There's specific people that can interact with the dead body, right? In regards to the priesthood, he's saying this is how you handle it, right? It has to, the only person that can is family members, right? Or anybody that's considered a brother, father, son, daughter, etc., or a virgin sister, right? So that's the first thing, right? The second thing is he must not be defiled by a woman of prostitution or who's divorced by her husband, right? Because that will make him defiled. The third thing we see here talks about in verse 11, he must not go in near any dead body, he must not defile himself, even for his father and mother. He must not leave or desecrate the sanctuary of his God, for the consecration of the anointing oil of his God is on him. I am the Lord. So, Yeshua's body is the temple. It's considered a temple, right? Like the brother mentioned, it's an offering, right, to the Father. That offering is set apart. That body is a sanctuary. It cannot be defiled by somebody who has known prostitution, adultery, whoredom, etc. Now, what is Mary Magdalene known for? Anybody?
Prostitution.
Gotcha. So she was not allowed to touch him because she would defile that offering. She would defile that temple, and he is not to go near anybody as a priest now, right? Because he's offering himself as a priest, giving his body as an offering, and he cannot desecrate that. He cannot defile that. So she was not allowed to touch or handle him. Now, when it comes to the dead body portion, he told her, "Go tell my brothers." Remember when he said they came to him and said, "Hey, your mother's asking for you," and he said, "Whoa, wait, wait. My mother's asking for me. You see these people over here? Those that do the will of my father, they're my mother, they're my brother. Them. So he told her, go to my brothers. And those brothers that he told her to go to were the disciples. They had a covenant meal that made them brothers, brought them into the brotherhood. Then when Thomas didn't believe, he allowed Thomas to touch him. Thomas was allowed to do that. He was considered next of kin. He called them his brothers, and that's why he allowed Thomas to do that for the sake of his belief, right? But also to stay in alignment with him being a priest, offering himself up, as we see in Hebrews chapter 9 and 10. And that's my perspective on
All praises. Yo,
All
what do
right.
you think about what I read in Exodus 19 in terms of how, Moshe was being prepared to ascend unto the Father to get the words of the covenant.
it. Facts. He was
And
to keep himself separate from amongst the people, no sex or anything like that, because that word that's used there for touch can also mean in a secular, intimate sense as well, right? And we see, verses in Mishle, like Proverbs 20, that mention stuff like that, right? Being touched by a woman who's an adulterous woman, etc. So it can be also in a carnal sense, a carnal, intimate sense, like an inappropriate sense as well. You know what I'm saying? So we don't know. I mean, I don't know what her intentions were for wanting to do that, right? But he says, "Do not cling to me." You see some translations say that. That touching, if she was to come near to him, if he's supposed to be a set apart offering, she would have defiled it. So that's why he kept her from doing that, right? He had to be offered, right? And at that point, she wasn't. So, like you said, with Moses, because we're talking about typology, right? Moses is the archetype. And we saw when Moses had to ascend, he had to be set apart. And it was only him that could come up and get the covenant and the tablets, etc. Right? So we see Yeshua is a type of that because we saw he even spoke to Moses on Mount Transfiguration. He communicated with Moses and Eliyahu, right? and Moshe and Eliyahu, when they had a conversation about what's going to happen to him in Jerusalem, right, according to the book of Luke's account. So you see typologies there. So we can typify it to the priests because technically Moses is from the Levite lineage, which is the priesthood, and his brother Aaron was the one that officiated the priesthood, and his sons took it over from there. So as long as there's typologies, right, like the offering that the brother mentioned, first fruits offering, the ascending and being set apart to be given to the offer to the Father, right, and then also the body or the temple being set apart to be offered or then given to the Father cannot be defiled by one who has known prostitution, whoredom, and other things along those lines. So he refrained her from touching him, but allowed his brothers, according to Leviticus 21, 1-4, to get access to his body and be able to touch, right, and see for the sake of faith, not for anything else, right? So that's, again, that's my perspective on it, and I think if we looked at all three of the perspectives presented, I think that this gives a nice holistic perspective on how what we see in the Brit Hadashah is typified by what was already set forth in Torah.
Yeah, I'll praise the Most High. One more question. So, do you see a harmony between Moshe being given the words of the covenant and then the Talmudim receiving the Ruach Hakodesh during
Yes,
Pentecost?
yes, I think that was a pretty good insight on that
Oh,
that you had
praise God,
provided
I
praise
see
earlier.
that
God.
as a
So,
fulfillment of,
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
I see that
Tom.
as a
What you
fulfillment of
say?
what Yeshua. Yeah, no, I see the 1 year incident after the disciples when they received the Spirit. I think that's a fulfillment of 1 year earlier. I think Yeshua is at a synagogue, telling them about the acceptable year of the Lord, and from then on, I think that's where. But that's a whole different issue. But I was going to say that you can also find some like details of this Yom Bikurim, this day of offering in the mission as well. The rabbis like go on and like, so for example, I think this is where is this? Explain of the Mishnah. I'm on 10. I'm trying to get the exact
And
same one.
Charlie, when you're done, I gotta make sure I get Divine to respond to the topic up at the top when you're done.
Yeah, no worries. But they basically essentially what they do is that they debate um in terms of how the Omer should be eaten and how it's processed, and they go back and forth from people that came close and how should it be how it's the procedure for it as well. So in the Mishnah, it kind of goes on into that kind of detail. I'm trying to get I'm at it right now, just I can't
Yeah, I'm
get.
about to say I'll
Yeah,
say what tractate is that
track 10. Yeah,
that you can
exactly.
share so we can take a look.
Trying to scroll up so if I can get
Are you on
this.
Safaria.org?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm on Sephora.org. I've never like really looked into it because I've wait, hold on, let me see if I can get this. So it's a whole lot of scrolling because this is just one huge. So, I scrolled all the way down. Three, two. Let me continue. Let me see because I've scrolled all the way down now. I've even lost where I'm at. Yes, Mishnah Menachot. There's an introduction from one.
Everybody, be sure to share the room too, please. We got 20 people in here right now. We only got 9 shares, so if y'all could just do me a solid, that'd be good. Ping somebody, whatever.
And also, John also makes he alludes to this when he rebukes the people, the priests, when they come to him. When he talks of the why is there's a way how he phrases it in terms of the winnowing fan, is and there's a way how he phrases it in the introduction where John is rebuking. And he's basically alluding to that procedure as well, and how the barley is basically processed. Um, but he's using the procedure to kind of show them that, um, how judgment is there, how judgment is now come to them because of their disobedience.
Matthew 3:12. Is that it? Matthew 3:12.
Um, can you
Yeah, it
read it? What
says.
is? I know
Yeah,
it's
it
something where
says.
it says about. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, this is good insight. Good insight. So yeah, so Matthew 3:12 says, his winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will clear
Yeah.
his threshing floor and gather
Yes.
his wheat
Yes.
into the barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. Is that it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
So that
Got
so
you.
that
Got you.
so so
Okay.
so he's basically referring to the procedure and how like the barley's prepared and processed, and this is what the rabbis go back and forth on terms of should the procedure of doing this, should it fall on which day of the week, because in the Pesach there's going to be a day where the Shabbat will fall, so the weekly and that day normally it depends on who you go who you listen to. Some people say it's the day after the Shabbat. So it depends on which day Pesach falls, and then that day following, when do they start the procedure of doing this whole process in the barley thing? And that's what John uses to rebuke. He's using that procedure, and he's basically rebuking the people in terms of judgment. But he's just using the whole procedure to kind of to show it, and you wouldn't understand it because you'll just see he's just talking some kind of poetic way. But no, he's using a well-known custom or well-known procedure to kind of show them how judgment is there.
And you talking about the when first fruits falls on, right? What day it
Yes, yeah, the
falls on.
winnowing fan and how it's
Gotcha.
parched and everything like that. Yeah.
Okay, I got you. I think I know where it's at. In the Mishnah, I'm looking now. Just give me a second. See if I can help you find it. All right, so I have something. So I'm gonna send it to you, Harold. And you can post it at the top if you don't mind, so that everybody can kind of follow along. So I just went ahead and sent it over to you, and it just gives you the list of sources in on Safaria.org that deals with the winnowing on the Shabbat. And maybe that's what you were alluding to, brother. I'm not sure which resource in there it is, but that gives you all of it. It parses everything out and lists and itemizes it out for you on Safari.org.
The link is up at the top for everybody. Laws of winnowing on Shabbat. Yeah. So, yeah, man, Divine. Well, first off, peace to you. Appreciate you coming to the room. It's not very often that I get to speak to you, but it's always a pleasure to have you. Um,
And of course, my brother. I mean, I saw it was.
yeah, for sure, man.
Yeah, I saw it was your room, and I saw Eliyahu, David, and Talmud in here, so I decided to jump in and listen in. But from your generous invitation, I came to the stage to kind of just contribute to the build. And these type of conversations is a great breeding ground for progress, right, amongst like-minded believers. So I genuinely appreciate it, and these type of environments, I think it's best for us to thrive and actually collectively contribute as a community, so we can get further in this walk. So I appreciate you for that.
Yeah,
All
man.
praise. Yeah, let me say this real quick here. To be honest, I've been waiting on this, because I know, just from a theological perspective, we align in a lot of different ways, and I think it was just a matter of time, by the grace of the Most High, for us to start to, really build and bring out information in essence that can, do just what I, it just said is, assist in the progress and the liberation of our people, with respect to the work that need to be done. So all praise be to the Most High. I appreciate you for coming through.
Oh yeah, yeah, man. So what's your thoughts, man? Up at the top, is Christ in the Tanakh or the OT? Let's try this again. Luke 24.
44 through 48 specifically. And it's let's try this again, because yesterday people was coming on, they was trying to respond, and at first they didn't realize there was a specific reference that was there, and they was just kind of coming off the dome. Yeah, Jesus is in the Old Testament. And they was quoting Isaiah 7 and Isaiah 9:6 and uh, Micah 5:2 and all kind of other scriptures and whatnot. But I give that scripture reference specifically because Jesus or Yeshua is saying something specific there in those passages, that he came to fulfill what's written in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. And then he summarizes uh, his statement by saying it behooved Christ to suffer and be resurrected from the dead on the third day, and that remission of sins and forgiveness should be preached on the basis or on account of him, and that you are my witnesses of these things. So what's your thoughts on that, man? Where could we be able to glean in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms anything about what Christ is teaching there in that summary statement about himself?
Yeah, I think that's a excellent question to look deep into. What I'll do is I'll give my conclusive premise, and then I'll go into to try and explicate why I came to my position that I'm at. So, my position is when we say it's Christ in the Old Testament, I don't see an individual named Jesus Christ anywhere in an ethereal form, a physical form, anywhere in what we call the Old Testament Tanakh Hebrew Bible, right? I don't see him anywhere. I do see things that allude to a Messiah type figure or entity, right? But all of these are apparitions of the Most High, right? So the angel of the Lord, when we see that is part of the Most High, revealing His word directly to somebody, as opposed to using another ontological entity like a malach or a messenger or something along those lines, right? Divine messenger or something like that. This is Him literally revealing Himself to somebody in a form that can interact with man, right? So I don't see that as being Jesus Christ at all. I don't subscribe to his pre-existence. I don't subscribe to a pre-incarnate form of Jesus Christ, God the Son, anything like that. So that's my position, right? Now, in regards to Luke chapter 24, which I think is very interesting, in verse 44, it says, Jesus said to them, "These are the words I spoke to you while I was with you. Everything must be fulfilled that is written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. So I'll pause right there. When he says that was written about me, this is in reference to an end time messianic figure in the apocalyptic age. The apocalyptic era or ion began by means of the prophet or the I'll say prophet, the Navi Daniel, right? So Daniel, he is considered, his work right now, scholars pin it to about 300, 200 CE in its final form that we have today. And what it did is it opened up this genre of apocalyptic literature that starts to come out in the pseudepigraphal works during the intertestamental period, right? And a lot of these works began to transition into a form of what we call Aramaic, right? Transition away from the Hebrew. So the book of Daniel, we see, is in both Hebrew and Aramaic. And it's like that intentionally. It's not like that by accident. There's a reason why portions of it is in Aramaic, portions of it is in Hebrew. The portions that's in Hebrew are messages that's geared directly to the children of Israel, Revelation, children of Israel. The parts that are Aramaic, being that Aramaic was the imperial lingua franca at the time, there's things that are for public use and diplomatic use, right? And that's the reason why we see those forms. So it opened up this age or this inquiry about these end time events, what's going to happen in the end times, and everything that was alluded to by the other Nevi'im that preceded Daniel, that spoke about a Messiah figure coming to redeem Israel, or the Most High using entities to redeem Israel on his behalf. So, according to the authors of the book of Luke or Lucas, they're proposing that this is Yeshua, right? They're saying that this is him claiming that those prophecies of a messianic figure coming to redeem Israel, or bring relief to Israel. That's the key word. Bring relief to Israel is talking about him. right? He's not really specific in verse 44 to 45 what exactly, but he said everything must be fulfilled that is written about me. So anything that's messianic wise or apocalyptic literature, right? That genre that we find in the Tanakh, he's saying that there's parts of it in there that has to be filled and it has to be about him, right? So must be fulfilled is something that is imperative and it's future tense, meaning that he did it at this point, right? So it was not completed at this point. Go on to verse 46, and he says, and he told them, this is what is written, that the Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and in his name repentance, forgiveness of sins will be proclaimed to all nations, beginning in Jerusalem. You are my witnesses of these things. Several things. He is not saying this is written in the law and the prophets. He uses that phraseology a lot, and he never says this is where it was written. He just says it is written. If you go back to Matthew chapter 5, when he gives a sermon on the mount, he says, you have heard it said of old time. He doesn't say it is written. But when people hear him say, you have heard it said of old time, they automatically try to link that to the Torah, right? Or elements of the Tanakh. But he didn't say that. He says, you've heard it said of old time. And he never said this is written in the law and the prophets. He says that these are things that was written, or this is what is written. Well, that word graphite in Greek could be anything that's written. And this could be pseudepigraphal works, which actually talk about a Messiah figure coming on the scene and doing a lot of these things, miracles and all types of stuff, right? This is why you see in the first century CE, it was right with various Messiah figures come on the scene and performing miracles and doing all types of stuff because they believed that they were ripe to fulfill it. If you look up the Gabriel stone, which is an artifact, a slab of stone that has an incision in it, you'll see that it's one of the first you know, I won't say non-messianic, but one of the first references to the opening or the beginning of a messianic age that the Jews at that time believed was about to begin, and this was written in the early first century CE. And after that stone, from what they did, it was established. Then you see all these messianic figures start coming on the scene and preaching these apocalyptic messages about the end times and all this other stuff, right? So historically, we have chronological markers, right? And in the literature of the genre of apocalyptic work, you'll see that a lot of these things were being written during that period of time preceding the first century CE, right? So he's not saying that this is in the law of the prophets. He didn't say this was written by Moses or anything like that. He just says that it was written that this would happen, and there's writings and pseudepigraphal works in the intertestament period that mention a Messiah figure come on the scene doing miracles and dying and rising from the dead. I got to share some of those references with you. It's pretty fascinating. So here, this is why I say that you're not going to find this in Tanakh. Some people say, "Oh, you go to Isaiah." People always use Isaiah 53, and I'm like, nah. That's a whole nother conversation, right? It's not clear there what it is. The reference can be the servant, meaning Israel. You do have some past and future tense or imperfect and perfect phraseology, right, in some of the verses, right, that indicates that this thing will come to pass. The majority of them is past tense. You have two or three that's future tense. So what is speaking about there is layered, and it requires a deep dive to parse through and be able to exegete exactly what the text is alluding to, right? But it's not saying anything explicitly that he's saying here that the Christ will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day. We don't find that in Isaiah chapter 53, right? You don't find that anywhere in the Tanakh. So for people to go look for it, I think that that's erroneous because he didn't say it was written in the law and the prophets. He just says it is written, A, B, and C. And there are writings that allude to that, right? That's not in Tanakh. So that's why it's good to study all the text that's been written in the period of time that we see the close of Malachi and then the opening of Matthew and see what was written during that period of time to see if there's anything there in those pseudepigraphal writings that can allude to things that Yeshua is saying that will happen. You know what I'm saying? And there are several of them that do mention that. So that's my position on it. Again, I don't subscribe to a pre-existent Jesus Christ or God the Son. I don't subscribe to a pre-incarnate form of Jesus Christ or anything like that. I think the allusions that's made to it, like when Paul talks about it was Christ was the rock that followed him, he's not saying that that's Jesus Christ or God the Son in some kind of ethereal body or form or nothing like that. He's using typology, right? And that's what he's saying because he's talking about the salvation that the Jews received with Moses, and he's using it as a typology about the Jews' salvation with Yeshua. right? Like the rock that was with them, gave them sustenance, gave them water. Yeshua said that out of his belly, those who believe him will flow rivers of living water, talking about the spirit, which he gave to his disciples and the apostles afterwards, right? So I think the places that people reach to try to find this stuff is just that, a reach. And I don't think that they're properly looking at the text for what it is, but they're using these preconceived notions that they've received in their upbringing in Christianity, which is a conglomerate of various councils, creeds, doctrines, etc., and dogmas that's been established from the second century onward. That has really given them their perspective or their lens and how to look at the New Testament. And because of that, I think they're being predisposed to something that is error. And that's my position.
Let me ask you two things, Divine. What's up?
What's going on, Void?
Chilling, chilling. Max, I'm sitting here playing video games as I'm talking to
Wait,
y'all.
wait. Before you ask him a question, uh, can I get somebody to read something for me real quick?
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
got you.
Talmud is the best reader here. So
He reads on the fifth grade level, so I might need to find somebody else. No, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
Yes, indeed.
Hey, brother
Praise to the
Divine,
Most
what's up,
High.
man?
what's going on, brother Kenny? How you doing, brother?
Hey, pretty good. I see you hanging with my partners, man. These my boys up in here, man. They cool
Yeah,
people.
these are all my buddies here, man. All these are my buddies here, man. And Torio, man, I'm surprised he's silent because he don't subscribe to none of this.
Yeah, he came in and said like one sentence and like just went on mute, man. Um, Tell me, can you pull up Wisdom of Solomon? This just came to my mind since the Divine made reference to apocryphal text, but Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 2, and read what is that? Verses 23 and 24, and then read down to the ninth verse of chapter 3, and that's it. And then Void can go ahead.
Con. Yeah, so that'll be 50 push-ups, brother. But
What?
I'm gonna start at verse 23. Yes, sir.
What?
Yeah, I need that.
Why?
Cause you got me reading. I need 50 push-ups, brother.
Fair enough.
Praises. This is verse 23. For it says, "For Allah created man to be immortal, and He made him to be the image of His own eternity. Nevertheless, through envy of the devil came death into the world, and they that hold of his side do find it." Chapter 3, verse 1. But the souls of the righteous are in the hand of Allah, and there shall no torment touch them. In the sight of the unwise, they seem to die, and their departure is taken for misery, and their going from us to be utter destruction. But they are in peace, for they be punished in the sight of men. Yet it is their hope full of immortality, and having been a little chastised, they shall be greatly rewarded. For Allah improved them, and to be found worthy of Himself. As gold in the furnace, He has tried them, and it received them as an ascending smoke offering. And in the time of their visitation, they shall shine and run to and fro like sparks among the stubble. And they shall judge the nations and have dominion over the people. And their Yahweh shall reign forever. And they that put their trust in Him shall understand the truth. And as such, be faithful in love shall abide with Him. For grace and mercy is to His Kodeshim, and He has care for His elect.
All praises. That was it.
That's verse 9.
Okay. Yours is probably read a little different than mine. Cool. Appreciate it. That's all. Void, you good. Go ahead, man. Thank you,
Yeah.
tell me.
All praises. Yo, check this out though, real quick. You know how we say things like the Mashiach or the anointed is a vessel of divine spark, or the anointing itself is a divine spark. And you see here in verse 7, it says, at the time of their visitation, they shall shine, run to and fro like sparks among the stubble. That's heavy.
Yes, sir. I'm glad you pointed that out too, man. But Divine, you think that that kind of speaks a little bit, at least a tad bit, to what you were saying?
Yes, most definitely. Apologize for the delay. If you hear slight delays, because I'm working at the same
You're good.
time. Yes, it does. Yeah. So, what you just mentioned, I think, is one of the major allusions to that. And there's a lot of pseudepigraphal writings. Like R.H. Charles, he had put together a work that consisted of about 17 of them, and scholars say that 15 of the 17 that he translated is confirmed to be pseudepigraphal works. But those are only the ones that he had collected. You know, there's so many more that have not been collected, that have been quoted from church fathers and other things as well. You know what I'm saying? So um, at the first century, there are things that would have been known to them, or writings that may have existed at that time that we don't have today, right? That reference that. But what we do have today have allusions to that. And one of the ones that you mentioned in the Psalm of Solomon also refers to that. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of times, a lot of the messianic or apocalyptic and messianic prophecies were mostly about a militant soldier, a Messiah coming from the lineage of David, coming to eradicate the enemies of Israel, right? And then also redeeming them from their sinful state, right? This is also believed in the two Messiah theory in Judaism. You know what I'm saying? So we see that the idea or the concept of this Messiah, you know, giving himself over, right, for the sake of Israel and rising up and being triumphant. Like you see a lot of this in the hymnal statements made by Paul, right, about him trumping principalities and powers and so forth, right? Those words can be found in classical Greek to refer to troops and armies and stuff like that. And at that time, it was believed that they were ethereal entities that controlled troops and armies and so forth. So his resurrection, right, and his ascension and him ruling is show forth that he is above these armies and these troops, and he has control over them. So that militant sense of this Messiah coming to redeem Israel is something that was already something that they were waiting for, right? Hence why, you know, the zealots existed, right? And because of them, a lot of these skirmishes between the Romans occurred, right? So again, you know, what you mentioned, my brother, part of the superpure ranks that we do have in existence today alludes to these things about Christ, and a lot of other things that we don't exist anymore, which some church fathers have also cited and quoted themselves in regards to a Messiah figure dying on behalf of Israel, and you know, one being triumphant that's gonna come and ride on the clouds of heaven and defeat the enemies of Israel. We even see a lot of these things alluded to in what we call the Dead Sea Scrolls repository. Right, all their non-biblical writings, they were heavily apocalyptic, and you see a lot of these allusions in there as well. And they wasn't. It's not believed that any of these things were created there. They just kept the tradition that goes back to at least what scholars say is the late Persian, early Grecian captivity. You know what I'm saying? So what we discovered there was not created by them. It came from an earlier tradition and textual transmission that's earlier than what we find there. So this apocalyptic idea of a Messiah figure coming to redeem Israel is nothing that is new or unfamiliar to that audience. They were already expecting that. Yeshua is now, or the author is now, applying it to Yeshua, saying that this is the guy who it's referring to, you know. And this is why the people were so apt to follow him as a prophet, doing these signs and miracles, because in these writings it talks about these things, right? And in that first century period, this is what people were expecting. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I think we're all on the same page, and I think all the contributions we made make a great case that you don't have to force Jesus Christ or God the Son in the Tanakh in order for everything that we see revealed in the Brit Hadashah New Testament.
Right. So would you say that I'm sorry, I just got to ask him these questions while I got him in the void. I'm gonna let you go. I promise. The way that I see I'll ask for what's your thoughts on this? The way that I see the scriptures is the law, and then you have the prophets, which is a summary of the narrative of the law. Then you have the pseudepigrapha or the apocryphal writings, which would be summaries of the narrative of the law and the prophets collectively. And then the New Testament or the Gospels and the apostle writings would be commentary and summaries of the testimony of both the law, prophets, Psalms, and then you could even say the apocryphal writings as well in some instances. What do you think about that?
I agree.
All right. Void, you just wanted to talk with him. Thanks, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, anytime. I just love somebody on the opposite team to come in here and give a perspective on some of the insights we're bringing, because I would love to see how they reconcile what we're saying based on what they where they stand. You know what I'm saying? It's just good to have that bouncing back and forth so people can see both sides of the coin.
Yeah, we'll probably do that in a little bit, as long as they remain respectful and collected, because I want to make sure this room keeps a certain energy. So, but Void, you go ahead, and I probably let one of them up.
Got you. Divine, I got two questions. So my first question is, when Jesus is talking to regular everyday people, people who are like lay people in the New Testament, when he says, have you not heard? Because you actually brought it up. Jesus says, have you not heard to those people? And then to the Pharisees or the lawyers of the time, he says, have you not read? Is it fair to say, or would you? I guess can we use like deductive reasoning, and can we say when Jesus says, "Have you not heard?" Can we say that he's probably not alluding to the Tanakh? He's probably alluding to the oral tradition that they would have gotten from the Pharisees and the lawyers of their day.
Yes, so he would say heard because he's talking to commenters who were illiterate, right? Just like most of his disciples were illiterate, with the exception of maybe Matthew, because he's a publican and he had to record taxes, right? So for the most part, if he's speaking to commenters like Matthew chapter 5, he's going to say that because all of them, they're not literate. They can't read. If you put a Torah scroll in front of them, they can't read. That's why when Jesus did it, they were shocked. Like, oh, what? He wasn't formally trained by us. How is this guy who's a carpenter able to read? Let alone give an understanding, or give midrash. So that's why he said that. Now, as far as the Pharisees, there was always the scribes around them, right? Scribes were the ones responsible for writing these scrolls, creating these scrolls, right? So that's what he says, haven't heard. So I think it's a combination of both. It could be things that they've learned from going to the synagogue, right? We have liturgical Hebrew being read to them, and then them giving an explanation Aramaic, and or the people being read to from the Targum, right, to get an understanding. So most of the time, the people there would not be reading anything; it would be being read to them, right? Just like if you go to church, you know what I'm saying, the pastor in the pulpit and he's reading the scripture. People heard what was said in the church, but they're not actually reading it for themselves. Most of the people are not picking up their own Bible to read it. The difference is back then, common people wasn't walking around with scrolls. So to say, have you not read? What are they reading? Has nothing to do with their day-to-day lives, right? So they wouldn't be reading anything. So the expectation is that the Pharisees, scribes, and Sadducees, who are the more elitist and educated amongst the people, they should have a reference they can go back and read, right? So I think that's why he referred it to them. Now, as far as the oral tradition, we know that exists, like Mark chapter 7, the washing of the hands in a ritualistic fashion that was only designed to be for the priests before entering the temple. And then now turning that into a dogma to be imposed upon the people, that was erroneous, and Yeshua spoke about that. Korban, we don't see Korban anywhere in Torah, right? But that was something that was created in the oral tradition, where you can give you can dedicate or devote items that you have as an offering, so that way nobody else can get access to it. So if you devote your entire livelihood and wealth to the temple, then you can't give that to your parents. It's already been dedicated to the deity, so the parents can't get access to it. But that korban, that's not in Torah. right? That's something that developed in the oral tradition. So I would look at it on a case by case basis. What passages are we looking at? Are we examining for this? But yes, I believe that the people, obviously, they were exposed to the oral tradition, so they did know it, right? But they also knew some of the written text because we see it quoted in Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
My second question to you is, you gave some references for Messiahism and other apocalyptic texts. What references, I guess, would you give? I'm gonna write some of them down. Thanks.
Yeah. So one of the ones that we know, I'll deal with one main one because right now I'm multitasking. But one main one that we're aware of is what we see in Daniel chapter 7. This idea of the Son of Man coming on the clouds, right? That's a reference in Daniel 7. It is believed through the lineage of Judaism that the Son of Man represented there in Daniel 7 is representing the entire, all the saints, right? That they represent the Son of Man, right? And they will be given the kingdom like the Son of Man is be given the kingdom. However, in later apocalyptic texts, they read that literally to mean a singular entity that's coming to redeem Israel, as opposed to the nations that's ruling at that time being overthrown by Yah and his people, the saints of Yah, who will be given the kingdom. So Yeshua makes references to that when he says, you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. When he was on his trial, right before his crucifixion, he talked about the Son of Man coming on the clouds. This is a direct reference to what we see in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, right? Because again, Daniel 7 opens up the apocalyptic work. So anytime you see him refer to something alluded to in Daniel 7, like we see in Matthew 24, where he says, the desolation of transformation that's there in the temple, that's a reference to Daniel, right? Where we see a fulfillment of that during the Grecian period, right? Antiochus the fourth offered a pig on the altar, right? But then also we see future references where they believe that once the Maccabees came on the scene and created the Hasmonean dynasty, that they closed off that aeon or that age until the Romans came on the scene. So there was an anticipation that what Jesus says was going, or Yeshua says was going to happen again. So it wasn't just isolated to its fulfillment that we see in the book of Maccabees, but also what should be happening in the future, right? They believe the temple would be desecrated and destroyed. Why? Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke was all written post 70 AD. They were all written, this is the general consensus, after the destruction of the temple. So something he's alluding to, talking about the temple, like we see in Matthew 24, not one stone was left unturned. All these are references to the central part of the Knesset or community, which would be that temple that was standing, right? So that's my perspective on that, and I believe that several other references we can go to that he references as well, like Isaiah chapter 61 and others as well, where he says the Spirit of the Lord is descending upon me. He starts referencing to all of those different spirits, etc. All these references that he's making to that, he's applying to himself, right? So those are the things that I would say. If we look at them on a case by case basis, we're either looking at a direct quotation, an allusion, or something that infers, right, that this is what he's talking about, gathering data from the Tanakh, but also things that are written elsewhere to create this messianic profile that is then applied to himself.
Hey, no, I meant like like, and you say you were busy, like just like a list real quick of like the extra biblical stuff, because I think everybody might
Oh,
be
you
pretty
said
familiar
extra
with the
biblical stuff?
yeah, extra biblical stuff that he might allude into withdrawal from.
Yeah, so one example would be the book of Enoch when he talk about the angels are not given in marriage. They do not marry nor give it in marriage. That reference is in the book of Enoch. That we see that those sons of God that is good that they're called in Genesis chapter 6, those watchers that when they're being prophesied to by Enoch, it's being said that they were not created to marry or to be given in marriage, right? And that's why what they did was a defilement, and that's why we see their punishment referenced by Peter in his epistle, and then later on in Jude in his epistle. And there's plenty others as well. I just, like I said, I'm just working at the same time, just talking off the cuff.
Got you. Thank you. I appreciate it, Devon.
Yeah, anytime, my brother.